Gang, what's up? Aaron here, Canadian Lonely. I've got my girl, Sweet Pea. She won't get off the desk. She doesn't know that we're going to do a show right now. So we've got the best of what has happened in the off hours outside of question period, because that's mostly what they get their clips from. We watch and cover all the Canadian federal politics, all of the committee meetings, we pretty much watch everything that happens on Parliament Hill, like the scrums, everything, and we put it on here. But I do this pre-show now, like before the question period, where we show all of the things that happened earlier that day. We're going to do a weekend review right here of what happened before question period. Like, they don't show this on CBC. We're going to kick it off right here. We're ready to go. Here we go. Come on. In Canadian federal politics, the Canucks are represented by two separate yet unequal groups. The globalists who sold out and the opposition trying to salvage a country. These are their stories.
Budget 2025's climate competitive strategy is both a climate plan and an economic plan for BC. It mobilizes capital for clean energy projects and accelerates critical mineral development, essential for EV batteries, renewable technology, and Canada's long-term economic competitiveness. Next, seniors. Seniors in our community are the backbone of my riding. Budget 2025 strengthens the New Horizons for Seniors program, funding local projects that reduce isolation and promote active living. It also launches Canada's first national anti-fraud strategy, protecting seniors from scams and financial abuse, which is a growing concern today. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2025 is a plan to build Canada strong, and that starts in communities like mine. More homes, better infrastructure, lower costs for families, good jobs for youth and workers, a cleaner, more competitive economy, support for seniors. We can give ourselves more than any foreign government can take from us. We will be our own best customer, and when we build in Canada, when we buy in Canada, when we believe in Canada, we can build an economy that works for everyone across our community and our nation. Because when we build Canada strong, we build Port Moody, Coquitlam strong, and I hope that we can count on members opposite for their support. Merci.
Questions and comments. Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for Leduc, Wetaskiwin.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's pretty safe to say that the Honourable Member cannot count on my support for this this budget. Mr. Speaker, the debt right now in Canada, the debt is more than the budget. So the amount of debt we owe is more than the entire budget of the federal government. So every dollar spent is dollar borrowed from Canadians, from future Canadians. This has happened before. According to Fitch Ratings, right after the budget, quote, Canada's proposed budget announced in Parliament on November 4th underscores the erosion of the federal government's finances. Continued, quote, persistent fiscal expansion and a rising debt burden have weakened its credit profile and could increase rating pressure over the medium term. Mr. Speaker, this has happened before with crushing impact on the social programs Canadians care about and benefit from. In the 90s, after similar rating pressure, the Liberal government of the day was forced to cut 32% from the federal health and social transfers over just 2 years. Isn't the member concerned about the same thing happening today?
Member for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. You know, currently, Canada has the highest credit rating, the AAA rating, and we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the world. And what gives me incredible hope is that there's something to be said about the speed of trust. And our Prime Minister right now is meeting with leaders from other countries.
Colleagues, 5.
It's incredible things. This is something that I've learned.
Please the Honourable Member for Kildonan, St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada is an amazing place that builds incredible things. This is something that I've learned over the last 6 months that I've been Shadow Minister for Industry for Canada. I've seen firsthand Winnipeggers building part of the F-35 fighter jet, the world's best, most powerful fighter jet, right here in Winnipeg. It's incredible what Winnipeggers are building. And then here in Ottawa, I have seen at Mission Control, a company here that's building a lunar rover. We have people in Ottawa who are building something that's going to traverse the lunar landscape and send information back to Canada. It is incredible what Canadians are building today and what they have built in history and what they will surely build into the future. In fact, I feel very hopeful about the future, especially when you consider how much natural resources this country has, how hardworking our people are, how educated our people are. There's so much to be hopeful for. And unfortunately, we are in very turbulent waters, Mr. Speaker, without land in sight. We have over 2 million people every single month in a country as prosperous as Canada going to food banks because they can't afford to feed themselves. The work that I've done locally in Winnipeg, reaching out to the food banks there, it is shocking what they're seeing. For the first time in their long history, they are seeing full-time dual-income households, two-parent, two-income households having to go to food banks because they can't afford to feed their families. That has never happened to two-income households to this degree in Canada. We're seeing half of my generation, the millennials, will never be able to afford a home, despite Canada being the second largest landmass on earth, with really everything you could possibly need to build houses. And we're working harder than ever, and yet we won't be able to afford homes. It's quite shocking that this is happening in Canada, despite all that we have, all that we're creating, everything at our disposal. And so why is this happening? Why does it feel like working people are spinning their tires? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of them is the economist-friendly word productivity. We are having a productivity crisis in this country. And, when I engage people in my community, often their eyes will glaze over about productivity. I totally get it. But we have heard, and I have heard from business leaders, from economists, from the Bank of Canada, that productivity is in fact one of the #1 issues when it comes to standard of living in Canada, and it is in a crisis. In fact, Tiff Macklem, the governor of the Bank of Canada, just said last month, he said, quote, "What's most concerning is that unless we change something, our standard of living as a country, as Canadians, is going to be lower than it otherwise would have been." And when he was talking at the press conference giving this update about the Canadian economy, he went like this. He said the standard of living was going to be like this. Now it's going to be like this. So we're going to be poorer out of the mouth of the Bank of Canada governor. He's telling Canadians, and parliamentarians should all be very concerned about this, that we're going to be poorer as a country if we keep going down this trajectory. And of course, there's world factors in that, like the trade war, but many of these issues existed long before Trump 2.0 ever came along, Mr. Speaker. And of course, we saw this a year and a half ago in March 2024, also from the Bank of Canada. Senior Deputy Governor Carolyn Rogers said about productivity, it's an emergency, it's time to break the glass. It's time to sound the fire alarm. It's time to evacuate because the productivity is so bad. But again, how does this relate to everyday people, Mr. Speaker? Again, it's not about, I think most people think when we say, oh, we have a productivity problem, they think, well, what do I have to work harder? That's actually not what it means. Nicholas Vincent from the Bank of Canada as well, the external deputy governor, said, quote, "Canada's affordability problem is really a productivity problem. If we want to make things more affordable, we need to raise our incomes, of course. And the way to grow our incomes, he said, is by increasing our productivity." So it is mission critical that we fix this productivity problem, and the results are very stark. In fact, after 10 years of Liberal government and the way that they approach the economy, we've had very poor results when it comes to productivity. In fact, it has barely grown at all since they've been in power. And when we often compete with the U.S., obviously they're our biggest buyer for our trade, but they're also our biggest competitor when it comes to businesses selecting where they're going to build factories, where they're going to hire more workers, where they're going to innovate. They're our biggest competitor, and they're in fact our productivity is, in fact, 30% lower than the U.S. And, in fact, in real U.S. manufacturing, the construction investment has been up over 300% since 2008, and Canada's has been flat since that time. So we're competing against a country that is investing 300% more in real manufacturing than us. And in fact, U.S. firms invest triple what Canadian firms do. So a Canadian firm will be investing about $4,100 per worker annually in our workforce. And the U.S. is investing over $12,800 per worker annually. So for people to understand, let's say you work in an office and everyone works on their computers. It's as if the person beside you is working on modern computer technology. They have AI, they have virtual calling, they have a smartphone, all of those things. And you're just as smart as them, you work just as hard as they do, but you're trying to do the same job working on dial-up internet on a 1990s computer. That's the reality when we talk about investing in our workforce and what we're up against with the behemoth that is the U.S. And we used to be more on par with investment per worker. Our productivity used to be a lot closer. And now they're just leaps and bounds ahead of us, especially after the last 10 years. And in fact, it's so bad that if we were to just catch up to where the Americans are in terms of productivity, individual per capita GDP, per capita output into the economy would be $20,000 higher per worker in Canada. That's how much it would generate in economic growth and productivity. And obviously, as we've heard from the Bank of Canada, when we increase our productivity, we increase our incomes, and we increase the standard of living for Canadians. So why is our productivity suffering so much? Because it's not from a lack of effort. It's not from a lack of innovation. It's not from a lack of enterprise or education. One of the main causes is the regulatory burden. In fact, companies spend at least $51 billion a year meeting regulatory requirements, according to the CEO of the Food, Health and Consumer Products of Canada. He said that at Industry Committee, where we're currently studying productivity. And the Business Council of Canada said, quote, businesses across every sector from natural resources to housing to finance rank regulation as the single biggest barrier to new investment in Canada. So regulation is a big, big factor of why we're not producing as efficiently as other countries, predominantly the United States, our largest competitor. And again, why is this? Well, we've seen the results over the last 10 years. As I've said, under Liberal governance, the country's productivity has been relatively flat. So it's basically, if you think of Canada as one worker, you know, over time, we work hard, our wages, we hope, go up. That's mostly the career trajectory of your average working Canadian. So it's as if Canada, or as a worker, has not got a raise, has not improved their productivity, has not gotten more experience, has not created more, has not created more value somehow since 2014. This country has not, in essence, got a raise since 2014, despite all of the inflation. That's one way to really understand the magnitude of what we're facing under 10 years of really poor economic performance led by government policies at the federal level. And so we see things like, infamously, the Liberals' Bill C-69, I think, really shows what this government is about. They have made it incredibly hard to build large projects. In fact, they've denied this for a long time. We've been banging this Bill C-69 drum, but it was really proved in large measure by the new Liberal leader, the new Prime Minister of Canada, under the same, governing the same bunch of Liberals who've been voting on these policies for over a decade, because he made a new level of bureaucracy to just go over top the disaster of a mountain of bureaucracy they've created that made it very difficult to be successful in this country as a large creator of a manufacturing or resource development. So they just built a new layer of bureaucracy on top, and they're going to pick which special companies get to go ahead and skip all those regulatory burdens that they've created that all the other companies are going to have to go over. So that's just one example. They also have the industrial carbon tax, of course, that increases the price of energy on Canada's largest manufacturers. It's more expensive to make steel here because of something like the industrial carbon tax. Again, our taxes need to be competitive. Our regulatory environment needs to be that when a business is looking, like an auto sector business is saying, we could expand in Canada or we can expand in the U.S., where are we going to go? Where we're going to go where the best bottom line is for us. And so they're going to look at where they can get the fastest permits, where there's the least regulatory hurdles, where they can make the most profit so they can hire more people and invest in more technology to be more efficient and have more output. And time again, long before Trump 2.0 came along, businesses were upping and leaving for the U.S., or they were expanding rather than here, they were expanding down there. And now that Trump 2.0 has came along, it's exacerbated all of this mess that the Liberals have created over a decade, impacting the cost of living. So really, when we're looking at this, we saw in the last election, the Prime Minister and the Liberal leader said he was going to really be the one to change this, and that he was going to bring forward a transformational budget. And in fact, we've seen that that's not really the case. They've made a few tweaks around the margins. They've finally, after a decade, said that productivity is a problem and we want to work on the economy. Thank God. but they've only made a few tweaks around the margins. The only party, Mr. Speaker, that's really going to make the transformation to the regulatory and taxation burden we have in this country so that Canada can have a better standard of living is the people that have been saying the same thing about this for 10 years, and that's a Conservative majority government in this country. That's what we need to transform the economy and increase the standard of living and the opportunities for Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Then comments. Question and commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. If you were to compare the two previous administrations, Justin Trudeau to Stephen Harper, based on what the member was saying, Justin Trudeau created double the number of jobs as Stephen Harper did in a shorter period of time of governance. So we're talking 1 million versus 2 million. Now, if you since we've had the new government, we have a Prime Minister that has negotiated with the provinces, Indigenous leaders, building a one Canada economy. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that we get the best deal for Canada and Canadians with respect to the Americans deal. And, Mr. Speaker, we have a Prime Minister that is traveling the world, increasing exports, getting hundreds of millions of dollars of commitments coming into Canada, whether it's China, Korea, Philippines, India, the Emirates, England. We have legislation on England. I'm wondering if she...
I have to give time for the member to respond. The member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so glad that the member for Winnipeg North has got up to engage me in debate, because no one in this House has stood up and said more words defending the Liberal record than that member over the last decade. No one has defended their productivity decline in this country. No one has defended the policies that have impoverished Canadians, that have sent businesses south, more than that member. So I certainly won't take any lessons from him about economics, since he, that more than anybody else, has stood here. We've had to listen to him for a decade defending their record, and their record has been 2 million people going to food banks and thousands of manufacturing jobs going south.
Questions and comments. Question and commentaire. The Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
And I definitely appreciate what my colleague has brought to the floor today. Yesterday, we were fighting in this place for Canadians' jobs, and she's talking about productivity, while the other side of the floor said, well, we're investing in them in the meantime. In other words, they are giving them handouts. And we heard over and over again, Canadians don't want handouts, they want their jobs. They don't want them feeding their children, they want to be able to feed their children themselves. So how does that fit into this situation?
Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
I think the member for the question, I think she's hitting on something really important about how Liberals versus Conservatives would be approaching this situation. So Liberals look at the economy like it's some big switchboard that they get to control. And if they just turn this knob and pick this industry and dump billions of taxpayer dollars here, maybe here, but not over here, that they'll create this prosperous environment. And as I outlined, and as many economists have outlined, their approach to the economy does not work. And we've just seen more of the same in that, just a little bit of lip service towards productivity and a few tweaks around the margins for the business sector. And so what we would be doing as Conservatives is looking, how do we create the most business-friendly environment in the world? How do we have companies choose Canada to create all their goods and services? How do we make it so that they can expand their manufacturing businesses here, that it's more competitive and more efficient to do so than in the U.S.? That would be our number one focus during this trade war. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that.
Questions and comments. Question and commentaire.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I listened to my honourable colleague's speech, and I'm wondering how he feels about the $620 million, which will go directly to housing and shelters for women. So that will help combat gender violence. I'd like to hear my colleague's thoughts on this effort and the importance of it.
I appreciate the question from the member, but the reality is, after 10 years of Liberals and their crime policies, their soft on crime policies, we have seen incredible rates of increase on sexual assault and sexual assaults on children in this country. And a lot of that, again, we have to look at the criminal code and how this government views the criminal code. And they repeatedly, time and time again, go soft on the people that are violating women, that are abusing women. In fact, I brought forward a bill that would have made it so that a peace bond bond. When a woman is abused, she has to somehow get the courage and the safety to go to a judge and ask for a peace bond. I put forward a bill so that that peace bond would last at least 2 years, so she wouldn't have to go through it 12 months later. Again, she's got kids, she's got a life, she's fighting for her safety. These Liberals voted that down at the Status of Women Committee. So I need no lecture from this government about fighting for women and the safety of women. We are the only party that's going to lock up the perpetrators, Mr. Speaker. And time again, we have put that forward with legislation that has been voted down by these Liberals.
Resuming debate. Reprise du débat. Alors, le député de Rivière, d'Émilie.
First round, we're going to go to the second round. Mr. Cooper for 5 minutes, 300 seconds. Just also want you to be mindful of the interpreters as well, please. So ask the question, response, ask the question, just to make sure that the interpreters everything's in sync here. So, okay, thank you. Go ahead, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bieber. I want to ask you some questions about carried interest payments that you alluded to earlier. Mr. Carney's ethics disclosure indicates that he is entitled to carried interest payments, which are essentially future bonus pay from the Brookfield Transition Fund 1, which he helped set up. Mr. Carney also co-chaired the Brookfield Transition Fund 2 as well as the Catalytic Transition Fund. Is Mr. Carney entitled to carried interest payments in respect of those funds?
No, he's not. And the reason for that is we were in the process of setting up those funds when Mr. Carney decided to leave Brookfield to pursue the Liberal leadership. And we had not yet instituted any allocation of carry from those funds. Those funds had not yet been raised. When we talk about launching a fund, we're starting the marketing of that fund, and they had not yet reached a conclusion, even an initial closing of those funds, and therefore we hadn't allocated any carry. Had he stayed with Brookfield, he certainly would have been entitled to some.
Thank you for that. And of course, he is entitled to carried interest payments in respect of the first fund, Brookfield Transition Fund 1. I just want to confirm that that fund is registered in Bermuda.
Registered in Bermuda? Yes, I believe that one is.
And the Brookfield Transition Fund 2 is also registered in Bermuda?
I don't have that information at hand.
Well, I would note a March 26, 2025 CBC News report that indicates that the Ontario Business Registry indicates that the governing jurisdiction for the Brookfield Global Transition Fund 1 and the Brookfield Global Transition Fund 2 is Bermuda. I presume you're not disputing that.
I won't dispute that.
And and I would also just ask that the Catalytic Transition Fund you'll confirm is registered in the Cayman Islands.
I can take that away and make sure that I'm not misspeaking on which jurisdiction it's part of.
I think you know the answer to that. It's yes. So I want to ask you a little bit about the schedule of payments with respect to carried interest from the Brookfield Transition Fund 1. When does the fund mature?
Transition Fund 1 would have a maturity of 10 years plus a 2-year possible extension, which would take it to 2032 to 34, I believe.
2032 or 2034. So it would be at that time that the carried interest payments would be paid out.
Towards that. And I would say that regardless of where the fund is actually established, everything that I mentioned in relation to Madame Lapointe's question hold for everything in that fund.
Now, just in terms of what is in that fund,
yes.
There are new investments in that fund, correct?
There are investments in that fund. They're not necessarily new.
But if there were new investments in that fund, that would increase the value of carried interest payments, would that potentially?
If additional capital were invested in that fund, it could, if they're good investments.
Okay. Now, Brookfield CEO Bruce Flatt was quoted in a National Post article dated March 15th, 2025, in which he described carried interest payments in the following way, quote, "Put simply, carried interest is our share of the profits realized on an entire fund subject to that fund exceeding a minimum target return for clients. If we meet fund expectations, we get 20% of the profits," close quote. So you would agree that that's an accurate characterization of how carried interest in respect of the fund works?
I think that's a fair summary, subject to that. The subject to is a very significant part of how carried interest works.
Right. So Brookfield ideally would get 20% of the profits if the threshold had been met or exceeded. Now, in terms of carried interest payments to the managing partners, what is the range? What is the percent of that 20%?
Well, it completely ranges by fund. And
I'm asking with respect to the Brookfield Transition Fund 1.
Need a quick response, Mr. Bieber, please.
It's a proportion of the total that Brookfield is
I'm
entitled
asking
to.
what is that portion?
Okay. May have to come back to that, Mr. Cooper. Okay, thank you. Ms. Church, for 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Mr. Bieber. Mr. Bieber, just picking up on a few points that were raised by my colleagues across the table, you were kind of cut off in your answer talking about the move of Brookfield Asset Management. Can you elaborate on what you were going to say in terms of the actual implications of that transfer of structure?
Yes, thank you. So I was in the process of explaining that nothing, in fact, moved in relation to the designation of New York as our principal office for purposes of the asset management business. That asset management business was launched close to 30 years ago, and we grew it within Brookfield Corporation for close to 25 years. As that, we launched it in Canada, but it, as I think the committee is well aware, has become a global alternative asset manager. The scale of that has been driven in large part by the clients that we have and the jurisdictions in which we've had those opportunities. The United States, being one of the principal capitals of the world in investment flows, drew.
We'll now go to Mrs. Jansen, please. 5.
Thank you so much. Minister, this is how I understand it. One of your core responsibilities is oversight of government spending, like especially when there's numbers that reach into the billions. Earlier this week, we learned that the Minister of Industry and her Deputy Minister did not review the Stellantis agreement in its entirety, a deal publicly reported to be around $15 billion. So naturally, we're wondering if anyone actually reviewed the whole thing. So my question to you would be, and I realize you weren't there, but perhaps your colleagues can help. Did the Treasury Board see the full Stellantis contract before approving $15 billion of spending?
Thank you for the question. As my colleague, you said that I was not there, and I can ask my, if you allow, then
please,
I can ask my
I'd like it's yes or no
question.
if you saw the full contract.
Normally, the way this would work is the departments responsible, they actually review the contracts. They would get authorities from the Treasury Board to go ahead and transact deals, but it would not involve a page-by-page contract review.
Okay, so you didn't see the whole thing either. Okay, so that's an interesting. So the Minister of Industry didn't see it, the Deputy Minister didn't see the whole thing, and the Treasury Board didn't see the whole thing, and you're approving billions. Minister, respectfully, how does a contract of this magnitude clear your department without anyone reviewing it?
As Deputy just stated, that there are delegated authorities to ministers. So there's certain authorities are delegated to ministers. So if those agreement or contracts submission, they are under those authorities, they can go ahead and get into contracts.
Sorry, Mr. I'm just have a question now for Mr. Ali. I'm just wondering, are you concerned that if the industry minister and the deputy minister went to Treasury Board for approval of $15 billion without reviewing the full agreement? Sorry, are you concerned about that? Is my question. Does that seem like a good process?
I think we actually have a robust process and procedure and rules in place, and everyone is adhered to follow those rules. And if the authorities are delegated to ministers, they are bound by those rules and regulations and policies. And I expect everyone follows those rules. And if someone does not follow, there are rules to.
So, but if I understand it, you are the person who has to worry about, or whoever was at the time, you have to be concerned about spending oversight. It's your job to make sure that they've actually fulfilled those obligations, right? That they, the spending is justified, the risks are understood, the department has done its homework, taxpayers aren't getting taken for a ride. Is there something we can do to ensure that someone is held accountable for not actually fulfilling those things, if we're not even checking? There are rules in place for oversight, and there are guidelines. There are authorities delegated to ministers, and if anyone goes beyond that or not follow those guidelines and policies, I think there's a mechanism to deal with it. They should be held accountable. Do you know, Minister, if anybody has read the entire contract?
Again, that contract was not in my, I was not a president.
Mr. Matthews or Mr. Trudell, no? Has anyone read the entire contract?
There would be people both from the Justice Department and in the department ISET itself that would have reviewed. I will take back to see if there was anyone within TBS that reviewed the entire contract, but the bulk of the work would have been Justice and the line department ISET.
Okay. So my biggest concern, honestly, is if we rubber stamp a bad deal because we don't know who's read what, aren't you supposed to be the ones that say, okay, hold on, does this actually make sense? Isn't that what the Treasury Board is about? Your name is on the bottom of the check.
Thank you. I agree with you that we we're accountable to Canadians. We need to be transparent, and we take every precaution.
You believe that there is a mechanism to...
Our time. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Ms. Khalid, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Minister and to colleagues for attending today to answer these questions on Supplementary Estimates B. I'll start with talking...
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, when Canadians saw the budget that was presented in Canada, I think they could use two words to describe it, and it's sticker shock. And it is sticker shock about the number which was presented as the deficit, the $78 billion. This was, of course, $16 billion more than the Prime Minister promised during the campaign. It is double what the last Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, had spent, and he had spent more than all Prime Ministers combined, and it is the most that this country has ever spent outside of the pandemic years. Let's go through some more numbers. There's over $90 billion of new spending, and the Liberals have called these generational investments. But they are, in fact, generational debt. And I'll talk a little bit about what this budget means for those who will have to pay for it later. But some more numbers. And what I mean by generational debt is that the Liberal government will add more than $320 billion of federal debt over the next 5 years, over the cycle of the budget. And again, that's more than Justin Trudeau was going to add, because he was at about $154 billion. The budget adds, I should say, $10 million of debt every hour. And why that matters, of course, is because, like any other debt that Canadians would incur, they pay interest on that debt. We're going to pay $55 billion just to service that debt every single year. And what that means is that isn't money that's going to doctors or hospitals or nurses, but it is in fact more than the government transfers to the provinces in healthcare. It is also the amount that the government collects in sales tax, in GST. So that means that every dollar collected in the sales tax by the federal government, again, is not going to go to doctors or hospitals or nurses, but it is going to go to bankers to service that debt. The weak economic performance in this budget is also something that should alarm Canadians, more than just the sticker shock. It's got real GDP growth in 2025 at 1.1%. That's the second lowest in the G7. Unemployment averaging 6.4% over the coming years, and an industrial carbon tax that remains in place and will actually get higher. These should all be concerning, but what is most concerning about this budget is that it tells a story of two different Canadas. It tells the story well, it creates effectively two different Canadas. Those who work for wages, who see nothing at all in terms of relief in this budget, and those who invest for income. And you've really targeted those two as very different. The problem is that the first group, those who go to work every single day, who collect a paycheck, well, they don't see anything in this budget. And it is concerning. This country has an overwhelming amount of potential. And it seems that at every turn over the last 10 years, that potential has been squandered. We have everything the world wants, and we should be the richest country in the world. But we've got a government that's spending away our future on a credit card with very little to show for it. We've got a federal bureaucracy that has grown by 99,000 workers over the last 10 years. And now a government who can't say where those reductions will come from. And by the way, none of your services have ever gotten better. In fact, you wait longer for services. You wait on the phone with CRA only to maybe get somebody. And if you do get somebody, 80% of those answers have found to be incorrect. It takes you longer to get a passport. It takes you longer to reach anybody on the phone. And yet the public service has grown and the services have gotten worse. And that's what you end up paying for in this budget. But more about the tale of two Canadas. If you draw your income from a portfolio, this budget might have a few things for you. It has some of the good ideas that we had brought forward in the last election campaign, although it doesn't go far enough. We can talk about resource development. This government has been beating its chest about a pipeline announcement that is going to come to the table at some point, whether it's in 6 days or 6 weeks or maybe not even at all. But in the case that it does come, because the Premier of Alberta has talked about it, the news media is all talking about it like there's a done deal. This is a government that invests in more bureaucracy rather than just going ahead and getting out of its own way. You see, in order to build a pipeline in this country, you've got to get rid of things like a shipping ban off of the West Coast, and we would applaud the government if they actually just came out and said what they were going to do. You'd have to get rid of an oil and gas cap in order for anything to be filled in that pipeline to be able to take it somewhere, and eventually to Tidewater, where there is still that shipping ban. You'd have to reduce the industrial carbon tax, or at least make sure that that particular project wasn't didn't have that in the way, just like Canada LNG. All of these things need to happen in order for a pipeline to get built. And all of these things probably will eventually happen while members of the party opposite will drag their feet kicking and screaming. But it is this Prime Minister who sabotaged all of that during his tenure of an advisor to this government. When the Prime Minister canceled the 2016 pipeline, or when he got in the way of it, frankly, being built and put in that shipping ban, it was this Prime Minister who cheered him on from the sidelines. You can read it in his very own book. And when I talk about the budget and squandering the potential, these are the things that we're talking about. This country has the smartest people in the world. We have enough food to feed ourselves and feed the rest of the world, and instead there are 2 million people lined up in a food bank, 4 million people that are going to use a food bank in Canada, and the government wants to be thanked for introducing a food program, because that's their answer always. Their answer is to create more bureaucracy. When they can't get a project built, they announce a project management office that's going to shuffle papers and eventually give an approval for something that has already been approved in the case of one pipeline, if we speak about it. Or if they cause food inflation to soar with their hidden taxes, like an industrial carbon tax that raises the tax on producers, a packaging tax that raises the tax on the buyers and the purchasers of food, or any of the other hidden food taxes, they come in with a big government program to ensure that Canadians will thank them. While the 2 million people are still in the food bank line and food costs here 40% more than it does in the U.S. It's always about centralization. It's always about making sure that you are to thank them for bringing in yet another government program to get rid of the problems that they themselves have caused over the last 10 years. That's the tale of the two Canadas. Those who work for a living, who are constantly trying to get further and further with less and less. An inflationary budget that spends $78 billion is going to ensure that that gets better, and that gets worse and not better. Today we have Canadians, young Canadians, 9 out of 10 who don't believe that they will ever buy a home. And the government's answer to that was to create yet another fourth housing bureaucracy to try to get houses built when the first 3 didn't work. They've dumped $13 billion into yet another government project. I think Canadians who work every single day, who go to work for wages, are wondering what the heck is in this budget for them and where they're going to see some reprieve. We have a lessening standard of living in this country, and the fear that we have is that young people will just get used to this idea. They will get used to the idea that they can't afford a good meal, that they can't afford a home to purchase, that they can't afford a good quality life in what should be the richest country in the world. It wasn't like this 10 years ago, and this budget does nothing to alleviate that pain, to alleviate the pain of those who go to work every single day and who are looking at this government for answers. They have provided none for those people. And that's why the Conservatives cannot and will not support $78 billion of new inflationary spending that will raise taxes and inflation on every single Canadian in every single part of their life.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, suffice to say, I disagree virtually with everything that the member opposite has said. When you take a look at the national budget that we brought forward, it's received wide spectrum of support in virtually every region. I even believe Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, wanted to see this particular budget passed. We have a Prime Minister that has been working with provinces, Indigenous leaders, and so many other stakeholders to build a stronger, healthier Canada. Major projects, investing in Canadians, and so forth. Yet all we hear from the Conservative Party is negativity. That's it. My advice to the member opposite and to the Conservative caucus as a whole is that Canada is not broken. Canada is still the very best country in the world to call home. And that is what we continue to work for on the government benches, to build the strongest, healthiest economy in the G7, Madam Speaker. That is our goal, and we will achieve that goal. And it's more of a comment than an actual question.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Seems like it's always a comment from that member. Madam Speaker, I said in this House that Canada has the utmost potential, the smartest people in the world, the resources that everybody wants, enough food to feed the world, and we are squandering that every single day by higher deficits, higher inflation, higher taxes. We have red tape in the way of building homes and mines and factories and pipelines, and we simply want to see an end to the inflationary deficit, and cutting taxes for everyone, a government that actually rewards hard work, and one that will restore affordability for every single Canadian. I know that's not too much to ask, and I know the member opposite understands the value of an opposition to an unchecked Prime Minister.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was interested in hearing my colleague speak about the impact that this budget will have on taxpayers. I'd like to hear from her about whether it's appropriate that the federal government is using public monies for a pipeline, for example, Trans Mountain. And we see that elsewhere in the budget. We see tens of billions of dollars invested in the oil and gas sector while the government is ignoring the forestry industry. So much money is being invested in the tar sands. Is it appropriate to invest so much public money into this sector?
Member for Thornhill.
Speaker, we wouldn't have to do that if the government just got out of its own way and reduced the impediments to resource development in this country, who approved projects in a way where private sector proponents would want to invest here, to lift the oil and gas cap, to stop the shipping ban, to lower the industrial carbon tax so it makes sense, or actually just, as they are going to do in this project, stop that from even being charged on the project when it is announced. We're going to applaud the government on announcing a pipeline. We're just not sure if everybody on that side agrees.
The member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge. The honourable member for Pitt Meadows.
Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for sharing her thoughts about the economy and the budget. I wonder if she agrees with me, or if she's as perplexed as I am right now, with comments that the Prime Minister has made regarding the fact that he was asked about if he's been in communication with Donald Trump, and he said, "Who cares?" He said, "There's no burning issue." That given that 75 to 80% of our trade is with the states, that mills are closing down, that in British Columbia, that our automobile sector is losing jobs, and I wonder if the member could comment about his nonchalance.
Member for Thornhill.
I think for all of those watching, the Prime Minister ran an election predicated on the biggest impediment to Canada's growing economy, and that's U.S. trade tariffs. So to hear him say, "I don't care," I want those who are watching at home to know that Conservatives care. The Conservatives care about the job losses in the auto sector from Windsor and Oshawa and everywhere in between. They care about the tariffs that have now tripled on steel and aluminum. They care about the jobs in the forestry sector. There is one party in this House that cares, and that is the Conservative Party. And I want Canadians to know that we're never going to write off the relationship with the U.S. as an I don't care nonchalant moment. That's not what a leader does. That's not what a leader should do.
Resuming debate, reprise du débat.
For Calgary, Crowfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think everyone here is old enough to remember the year 2015. That was the year that the Harper government brought the budget back into balance after successfully steering Canada through the Great Recession, and when the New York Times congratulated Canada for having the world's most prosperous middle class. This was a few years after the Liberals tried to topple the government because Harper's government refused to run larger deficits than were necessary to steer Canada through the 08-09 financial crash. They had run a disciplined government, one focused on core government services and responsibilities. That same year, the Liberals alone campaigned on a promise to run what they called modest deficits for 3 years that would fund unprecedented generational investments that would boost productivity and allow the budget to balance itself. That was the year that the Liberals destroyed the consensus that successive Liberal and Conservatives shared, that deficits matter, that debt matters, that fiscal discipline matters, that productivity matters, and that all of these things directly impact everyday Canadians and their struggles to make ends meet. So here we are, 10 years later, no historic transformational public investments occurred. During that time, the budget was never balanced, and the national debt doubled. The amount spent on Liberal consultants ballooned out of control despite the federal public service increasing by 100,000 employees, while service levels for Canadians declined. The armed forces still have rusting ships, 40-year-old fighter jets, only a few dozen operational tanks, crumbling barracks and housing. The CRA still can't answer the phone or give accurate information to Canadians. And now 10 years after the Liberals promised transformational, generational public expenditure to boost productivity and delivering the lowest per capita growth in the G7 and the OECD, they've tabled a budget promising the same broken promises recycled from 2015. Mr. Speaker, let there be no misunderstanding. This is a credit card budget. They've tabled a budget, the first in nearly 2 years, that sets a new non-pandemic record of $78 billion in deficit expenditure. That's double the size of the deficit that triggered the resignation of the member from University Rosedale when she was the finance minister. Remember that, Mr. Speaker? Remember the chaos this time last year and the consternation and hand-wringing over Trudeau's $42 billion deficit. Remember the 2025 election, Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister promised Canadians that he was the guy who was going to rein in public spending. This deficit in this budget is the equivalent of adding $5,300 of new debt to every Canadian in every Canadian family. And I will point out I do intend to split my time with the member for Hamilton East Stony Creek. So what do Canadians get for this staggering new debt that every Canadian knows they have to pay off with interest? Is there any new money in this budget to pay for this so-called generational investments that this government keeps talking about? And the answer is no. This act that we're debating does not contain money for transformational new productivity improving spending. It simply grows the size of government. They keep saying that they are going to reduce spending on the operations of government in order to spend more on capital projects. This budget says these words, but this act does not do these things. The main way with which this government plans to fulfill its unbelievable claims about its investments is through accounting trickery, Mr. Speaker. Some might say, well, what's wrong with that if it helps Canadians differentiate between the administration of government and capital cost? Well, what's wrong, Mr. Speaker, is that their definition is grossly misleading. It is overly expansive, says the PBO. What's wrong with it is that they are deliberately trying to trick Canadians into thinking that this government is building infrastructure when they're actually hiring bureaucrats or connected insiders with consulting contracts or dispensing corporate welfare and calling it capital investment. What's wrong is that they are not following internationally recognized definitions. What's wrong is that this government that has done so much over the last 10 years to compromise its fiscal credibility is now resorting to accounting trickery to try and fool Canadians and the finance community. 10 years ago, Mr. Speaker, the budget was balanced. Homes were relatively affordable in Canada, outside of Vancouver at least. Canada's middle class was doing all right, much better than in its peer countries. And over the last 10 years, though, Canada alone, among G7 countries, and alone among members of the OECD, with the exception of Luxembourg, has had no increase in per capita GDP. None. That means that in Canada, we have been left behind by our peer countries. The value of everything produced in Canada, divided by all of the people in Canada, is now the same as it was 10 years ago. But during that time, the cost of food has gone up, the cost of housing has doubled, the cost of rent has doubled, the cost of living has shot up while Canadians' productivity has not. And the Bank of Canada told the Finance Committee earlier this month, the productivity crisis and the cost of living crisis are the same thing, Mr. Speaker. Canadians increasingly can't afford to live because the government keeps growing, choking out consumers, absorbing more taxes, while creating laws that chase investment out of Canada, leaving workers less productive than in the rest of the developed world. The government spent 10 years passing anti-business laws that have left Canadians with fewer and fewer jobs in Canada's most productive industries. 1 full year ago, Mr. Speaker, before the tariff war, the senior deputy governor of the Bank of Canada called this a break glass emergency. She talked about how excessive regulation drives out investment from Canada's #1 industry, which is the energy industry. Energy is by far Canada's biggest and most valuable export. And this government spent 10 years trying to regulate it into the ground. There is nothing in this bill that will deal with the root cause of Canada's productivity emergency. There's a lot of talk about major projects. But when they talk about major projects, this government acts like it's having an out-of-body experience and has no idea who has been in charge of the government for the last 10 years and who introduced Bill C-69 and Bill C-48 and the carbon tax and the emission cap and a host of other major and minor acts that have chased $606 billion out of Canada to the United States even before Trump was inaugurated. So, Mr. Speaker, for a moment, let's set aside this government.
The official language that you wish to participate in today's meeting is selected on the device in front of you. Make sure you're on the channel that gives you the proper interpretation. If there is an issue with the translation, please get my attention. We'll suspend while it is being corrected.
Mr. Chair, can I just get your... So, Chair, I wanted to raise something with respect to the process on the witnesses for today. I'm really looking forward to hearing from these folks, but we did submit, every party has the ability to submit different witnesses. We did submit 39 witnesses as a Conservative Party, and none of them were, are here today. I'm very interested in hearing from the witnesses we have at the appropriate time and in the appropriate way. But 13 witnesses submitted by Liberals, 39 by Conservatives, and it just so happens that none of the Conservative ones were booked today. So I'd like to move the following motion: that during its study of the temporary foreign worker program, the committee direct the chair to be fair to all parties in his selection of witnesses, to consult with the vice chairs before finalizing witness panels, and to have 5 to 6 witness groups appear at each meeting. And I will submit that motion by email to the clerk in both official languages. It should be, Mr. Clerk, arriving in your inbox now. So I'd like to now say a few words on that motion. It's established practice that committees, in the process of examining important issues, should seek to ensure that all perspectives are heard in the course of its study on important issues. And I'm certainly interested in hearing all perspectives. I'm interested in hearing the perspectives of witnesses invited by other parties. Sometimes witnesses invited by other parties end up agreeing with positions we've taken, and vice versa. But in order to ensure there is a substantial, diverse and balanced conversation on the motions that come forward, the protocol is supposed to be that every party submits witnesses, and that the chair allocates those witnesses not based on his or her personal priorities, but based on roughly the proportions of the parties. And I know there are some variations here. There are some cases where a party may not submit enough witnesses to cover for their allocation. There may be cases where there are issues of availability if there's a smaller number of witnesses. It's hard to believe that there were issues of availability here. And just thinking back to the process, the deadline for submitting witnesses was, I believe, November the 14th. So it has been, I think, about 2 weeks since we submitted our witnesses. So if your office received 39 different witnesses on this study, all of which should have been fairly easily reachable, and within 2 weeks you couldn't find even one of those 39 witnesses to include here, raises some significant issues around the process. I know as well the Bloc submitted witnesses, and none of the witnesses submitted by the Bloc are here either. So I think we want to work collaboratively. We want to make sure this is a good study at which all perspectives are heard, but we don't want a situation in which the testimony is unbalanced. And looking at the witness list, I think you can see pretty clearly that Conservatives did our homework. We submitted with fewer resources. The government has access to vast resources available to it to identify suggested witnesses, and we have much less, relatively speaking, in terms of resources. And we submitted 39 witnesses compared to their 13, and we have 2 witness groups from the government. So this is not how I think we should proceed. I think we need to have committee hearings that are respectful of those standards. So with that, Chair, I'd like to move that we adjourn the meeting.
There's been a motion to adjourn the meeting. It's dilatory. So I will ask the clerk to call a vote on.
Resuming debate, the honourable member.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is always a pleasure to rise in this House and to speak on behalf of the incredible citizens of Calgary, Midnapore, that I'm so incredibly proud to represent. Now, M14, of course, is regarding Canada's international development assistance. And as a former diplomat for Canada, this is of special interest to me. I've had the opportunity to serve abroad and be just a small part of the implementation of Canadian development programming. So coming from this diplomatic background, I've had a bit of time to experience and to consider the thoughts for me, which are, what is the reasoning for foreign aid? What is the reasoning for international development? And for me, Madam Speaker, it is primarily 2 things. The first thing is the hope that all of humanity could have the incredible historic standard of living that we had in Canada. It's something absolutely wonderful. And the second reason for me, Madam Speaker, is that we as a nation could invest against future problems for Canada. I think that these are both very solid reasons and considerations behind foreign aid. And I'll expand on each of these ideas. So the first one that I said was the hope that all of humanity could have the incredible historic standard of living that we have had in Canada. And I would go so far to say that as a developed democratic nation, it's our obligation to help other nations on the road to democracy. And nothing feels better, Madam Speaker, than helping other people. I know my colleagues in the House would most certainly agree with that, since we get the opportunities as members of Parliament to do this. When I was consul en charge for Canada to El Salvador, I really enjoyed implementing the Canada Fund. And this was at a very special time in the history of El Salvador, certainly not the El Salvador we see now under Bukele, but a time where there was still much insecurity, instability within El Salvador. And so our funding with the Canada Fund was for children's organized sports. And this gave me a lot of joy, because I knew that in Canada investing in this, we were investing in the security and the safety of Salvadorians and of the nation El Salvador. Also, Madam Speaker, when you're raised in Calgary, Midnapore, you have had the best standard of living in the world. Calgary is consistently ranked as one of the world's most livable cities, and Midnapore itself was actually recently ranked as the 3rd best community in the city of Calgary. And my favorite thing about this, Madam Speaker, is that citizens of Calgary, Midnapore historically recognize that energy is the reason that we have had this amazing standard of living. It's the reason I got to swim in Lake Bonavista every summer with my school friends and then skate on it in the winter. But as I said, Madam Speaker, this was until recently. Things have changed in Canada that does not allow for the standard of living that we once had. These things include Canada has fallen to 27th place in the Global Quality of Life Index, dropping from 9th a decade ago. It's the largest decline among the world's top 30 countries. 2.2 million visits to food banks in March 2025, the highest number in Canadian history, and 700,000 of those food bank visits, Madam Speaker, are children. Food bank usage has doubled since March 2019. GDP per person has decreased by 2% from 2020 to 2024.
For Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, should judges be allowed to use a non-citizen's immigration status to issue a more lenient sentence to a non-citizen convicted of serious crimes like sexual assault, just so that they can avoid deportation? The answer is no. And tonight, I'm pleased to speak to Bill C-220, the One Law for All bill, which represents and reasserts the principles already laid out in the Immigration Refugee Protection Act with regard to the deportation consequences associated for non-citizens convicted of serious crimes like sexual assaults in Canada. The vast majority of people in Canada who have immigrated here abide by our law. So removal from Canada for non-citizens after being convicted of a serious crime is a no-brainer to protect everyone, the value of Canadian citizenship, and frankly just every person who resides in our country and plays by the rules. After a decade of liberal post-nationalism and excessively high immigration levels, accepting this change would allow the government to demonstrate respect for Canadian citizenship by affirming that at a minimum, the privilege of residing here for non-citizens depends on adherence to the rule of law. And everything that I've outlined, and that I will outline tonight, will show that beyond rote partisanship, there is no reason for the government not to support this bill. In fact, to save Canada's pluralism, the government must start admitting its errors with regard to immigration and working across party lines to accept common sense solutions. Colleagues, recent public polling shows that support for immigration among both Canadians and newcomers is at an all-time low. This opinion should shock and spur every person in this place to action to find ways to solve this problem. And that's what I'm trying to do here with this bill today. Thankfully, the reason why Canadians don't support immigration the same way they used to is not because Canadians are pointing the fingers at immigrants. Rather, Canadians who are unhappy about immigration are pointing their fingers where the blame should be placed, at the federal government who has, over the past decade, brought too many people in too fast for housing, healthcare, and jobs to keep up, while simultaneously legislating a doctrine of post-nationalism that asserts that there is no Canadian national identity, which includes things like an equanimous judiciary for non-citizens to integrate into. But Canada is at a tipping point. The government must quickly act to restore an immigration system that they broke. And if the government won't act, which it hasn't, then Parliament must. So in the spirit of nonpartisanship, I have used my private member's bill slot to correct one of the many areas that the government needs to act on to fix the immigration system. Later tonight, myself and my colleagues will move many amendments to Bill C-12 in a further effort to do the same. But back to this bill. To be fair to everyone and to start to prevent the further erosion of Canada's tolerance for immigration, we must ensure that non-citizens who commit serious crimes like sexual assault face the consequences that are already set out in our law. At a bare minimum, colleagues, non-citizens who abuse the great privilege of being in our country by committing a serious crime like sexual assault should face the deportation consequences that are already outlined in the Immigration Refugee Protection Act. And here's how we can do that. The bill before us tonight amends the Criminal Code by adding a new general sentencing principle under Section 718. This is the section of the Code where Parliament has exercised its right to provide guidance to the courts on how convicted offenders ought to be sentenced. My bill proposes to add a simple one-line new principle under Section 718.202, which states that when sentencing a convicted criminal who is not a Canadian citizen, a court shall not take into consideration any potential impact the sentence could have on the offender's immigration status in Canada or on that of a member of their family. This simple one-line provision ensures that provisions that are already outlined in the Immigration Refugee Protection Act are enforced in sentencing non-citizens convicted of serious crimes like sexual assault. That is the how, but here is the why. In recent years, there have been multiple instances of judges issuing sentences to non-citizens convicted of serious crimes that were designed to allow them to evade deportation. The net effect of this practice in considering a non-citizen's immigration status in order to give them more lenient sentences to avoid deportation is to create a two-tier justice system between non-citizens and those with Canadian citizenship. This is unfair and it is antithetical to the principles of fundamental justice and has eroded Canada's immigration consensus. Here are but a few examples of the rampant, excessive number of times non-citizens convicted of serious crimes like sexual assault have been issued two-tiered, lenient sentences in very recent history just so that they will avoid the deportation consequences already set out in the law. A non-citizen from India pleaded guilty to no fewer than 4 counts of voyeurism, which left his female victims with intense fear and anxiety and emotional distress. He was sentenced to 5.5 months jail. Why? Despite the judge admitting that 6 to 12 months would have been a more appropriate sentence. This was to avoid deportation, and the judge even said this. In a 2024 Calgary case, another non-citizen from India was granted a conditional discharge for attempting to purchase sexual services from a 15-year-old girl. They did this to allow him to preserve the eligibility to become a Canadian citizen and avoid deportation. The judge cited in the sentence the devastating collateral immigration consequences of a harsher penalty. What of the victims? A non-citizen in Canada on a visitor permit was convicted of twice groping an 18-year-old woman's genitals under her skirt as she stood at a bar to buy a drink. This person, this non-citizen, received a discharge from the judge so that he could have a deportation appeal. In March 2024, a 24-year-old non-citizen from Surrey, BC, received a conditional sentence of 2 years less a day for aggravated assault and possession of a weapon after stabbing a stranger. Sounds serious, right? Well, what did the judge do? The judge rejected the Crown's 4-year jail recommendation so that the non-citizen would be able to avoid deportation. In October 2025, just last month, Roosevelt Rush, a non-citizen from Jamaica, had his cocaine trafficking sentence halved from an expected term, while already serving 6 years for fentanyl and firearm offenses because the judge wanted to help him avoid deportation. In 2024, in BC, a non-citizen was convicted of fraud and received a 6-month sentence, which a judge shortened from 10 months so that he could what? Avoid deportation. In 2024, a non-citizen from Somalia was convicted of assault with threats against police and had their jail time cut short to evade deportation too. This one was a refugee who committed these crimes while getting the benefit of Canadian sanctuary. All this consideration for non-citizens convicted of serious crime to avoid deportation. But what about the victims? What about the value of Canadian citizenship or the responsibilities associated with being in our country? Being in Canada can't just be about receiving the privileges and the benefits of being in Canada, which are great. It also has to be about adhering to the responsibilities associated with that privilege, and that includes adhering to the rule of law. There are many other examples that illustrate the trend of immigration status being considered in sentencing, with criminal lawyers now routinely arguing for lighter sentences so that their non-citizen clients can evade deportation or denial of citizenship under IRPA's current provisions. Let me explain why this is happening. Ever since the Supreme...
Please, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair, Dr. Irwin, how many pediatric spots are there across Canada? It's under 10, is it?
So that's part of our initiative where we collected the data. So if we look at provincially funded, so publicly funded spots, on average there's around 65 a year for the subspecialties and a larger number. I think I'll have to get you the exact number, but it's at least double that number for general pediatrics. So first you must do general pediatrics for 4 years and then the subspecialties. So that 65 is for that latter part of training.
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask this about the special extra spots. Do you know how many, and just speak to Ontario, do you know how many extra spots there are for pediatrics in that extra group through the University of Toronto?
So you're talking about the visa specifically?
Right on, yeah.
So I do know for general pediatrics, we have about four. And it, again, does not take away from the other 20 to 25.
I get that. Now, of those four, have you ever had a female from Saudi Arabia?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
And how did you deal with the language barrier? Did that work itself out?
So all of our trainees, not just the visa trainees, all of our trainees who are not Canadian medical graduates take part in a I'll call it a probationary type of process we have for the first several months. And they are not only judged on their medical competency, but also their language competency
Thank you
as
so
part
much.
of that.
I'd like to share my time, Madam Chair, with Dan Mazur. Thank you.
Mr. Mazur, you have 3 minutes and 12 seconds.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to move the following motion. Given that the Chair abruptly suspended the meeting before completing 1 hour of testimony as agreed by the committee summons Dr. Patricia Houston, Vice Dean of Medical Education at University of Toronto, to appear within 1 week of this motion for 1 hour of testimony as part of the study on the impact of immigration policy and healthcare.
Now, there's a motion on the floor. Ms. Sidhu?
Madam Chair, I just want to let everyone know there's a technical difficulty, like 2 or 3 times happened. It's not anybody's fault. It was technical difficulty. And then second panel was waiting for that. Everyone has a question for the second panel. It's not anybody's fault. It's technical difficulty.
Thank you. I've got Ms. Conant.
Yes, I support this motion, and I would like it to go to a vote. I know for myself, I especially did not get to ask her any questions, the representative from the University of Toronto, and I felt that all of us here were really being educated about the programs that U of T offers, in particular for Saudi Arabian students. And I think we were getting to the core of what might be an issue in our medical system here, where we're excluding Canadians and bringing on people from other countries who are not staying here to work. And I don't know about everyone else around this table, but the people in my riding, in my area, are desperate for these doctors. We can't have people come and train here and then leave the country. If there's room for somebody to be here and train, then there must be room for a Canadian or somebody from another country to train here and then stay here. So they're taking up a space. I'd like to hear more about it, and so I support this motion.
Mr. Strauss? To the motion, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a really important issue. The motion that we previously agreed to was that we would do 1 hour of questions with her. We debated that motion at length. From my point of view, there already procedurally is a motion to that effect. We only got 50 minutes with her. I think the next time she appears, it could be by Zoom. There's no reason that it needs to put her out and fly her back up to Ottawa. But ultimately, this committee's already agreed. We had 1 hour of questioning with her. We didn't get it because of technical difficulties. But we did have resources to continue. So,
just to clarify, we were 11 minutes short in that hour. So perhaps you would like her to come for 11 minutes?
I think if she is going to the hassle of reappearing, then 11 minutes seems not.
You just suggested a Zoom meeting?
Sure. I think that would be reasonable, depending on her schedule. But she was giving very interesting answers. I think it's a fundamental issue with our medical education system if we're training up to 20% of doctors at these institutions to not serve Canadians using Canadian public resources. So yeah, I support the motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss.
Can we suspend for a moment, please?
Would you like to suspend, Ms. Chi? Thank you. We suspend. And let it be known that as a courtesy, I'm allowing the Conservative member to have 5 minutes with the witnesses. Mr. Strauss.
Thank you, Chair. So my questions today are for Dr. McPherson. Dr. McPherson, thank you so much for coming today. It means a lot on behalf of the people of Kitchener. Thank you for coming to serve our community. And beyond that, thank you for coming to committee today, because you're not just serving Kitchener now, you're serving the whole country of Canada. So we're really pleased and proud to have you here. I'd like to ask some questions at a high degree of granularity, because I think individual cases help us to understand what is actually going on with immigration for healthcare professionals. If I ask you any questions that are prying or you don't feel comfortable answering, just please let me know. Don't feel compelled to answer anything. We spoke a little bit before the meeting. By your lights, now you've practiced in both countries. You've practiced all around the United States, as you told me. Is there any reason ER doctors in general in the United States wouldn't be able to practice in Canada tomorrow?
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't found any really significant differences in the practice patterns that would prevent an American physician from practicing in Canada.
Fantastic. And overall, when you decided to come to Ontario, what barriers in terms of getting your license recognized did you meet?
I actually found the CPSO process for licensing to be fairly straightforward, just quite long. But I would say that compared to kind of the confusing process of British Columbia, Ontario's CPSO compares favorably.
I'm pleased to hear that. When you say long, how long do you mean?
It took me a few months to get the documents together. A lot of that includes getting official copies of transcripts from medical schools, which have to be mailed directly to the CPSO, and those are sort of the rate-limiting steps. If you are really dedicated, you can get it done within 2 or 3 months.
I see. So, I mean, I would say, I won't ask your opinion on this, but I would say I think that if you hold a license in Oregon, it's probably the case that you passed all your med school courses. And it's a little bit strange to me that they would insist on verifying those documents in particular. You spoke a little bit about the provincial nominee program and how that was giving you a hard time because of some terminology that I think pretty obviously needs to be changed. But may I ask, which immigration program are you currently here on and working under?
So I'm currently here on a temporary work permit, which will expire after 3 years.
I see. And then beyond the provincial nominee program that you're speaking about, are there any other federal immigration programs that you have evaluated or considered or engaged that could take you on the path to permanent residency?
I'm not aware of any other pathway that would be viable for me. I am trying to improve my French to get some additional points for my application.
Tell me a little bit more about that. How would improving your French improve your ability to buy a home in Kitchener, Ontario?
So if I can demonstrate a certain level of French, then I can potentially apply for express entry as a French-speaking skilled worker, which is an alternative pathway.
I see. And so if you were to be evaluated and meet criteria to be a French-speaking skilled worker, you would have an easier time achieving permanent residency to work in Kitchener, Ontario as a emergency room physician?
Yeah, I mean, essentially it's a completely different pathway, which I don't think has any specific bearing on being a physician. It's really just any skilled professional who is fluent in French can qualify for an alternative pathway to express entry.
All right.
1 minute.
There. We will begin now with 6 minutes for Mr. Halan.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Jakes, thanks for being here, and to your team for being so readily available for this committee. Mr. Jakes, you outlined in your report about Budget 2025 that $100 billion was misidentified under so-called investment, and that should have been operational expense. Why did you reclassify that $100 billion in your report?
I'm happy to talk a little bit how we treated capital investment in their issues note. Essentially, we compare the approach of the government, that is a bit broader, that includes a greater type of measures, with an approach that more closely follows other jurisdiction and international standards, that strictly focuses on transaction that directly increase the capital stock, and, like I said, follows definitions from international organization, from the System of National Accounts, from the United Nations. So that kind of extra amount of money would correspond to categories that the government has added to the definition, which can include, tax measures, production subsidies, and others.
Thank you. Now, given that you've reclassified that $100 billion, what does that do to the fiscal anchor of the operational budget that they're saying that they're going to supposedly balance in 3 years?
Well, I think that the one thing we highlighted in a report is that it would make it harder to balance the operating budget if the definition of capital was stricter.
Right. Now,
6 minutes. Mr. Chambers.
Mr. Chair. Minister, it's a pleasure to see you here. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. You have a big job. Forgive my brevity, but I have a few questions here, so I don't want you to take it the wrong way. I'm curious about the process for the Major Projects Office. Who makes the final decision about whether a project is referred to the MPO? Is that a decision that you make personally? Is that one that Cabinet makes? Is that one that the Prime Minister makes? Who holds that decision right?
So projects come forward from either industrial proponents who choose to bring them directly to the MPO or through the department, the relevant department. They can be brought forward by a province or territorial government, and oftentimes the province and territorial governments are very close to what's going on in their particular jurisdiction. They're often working with these proponents, and they often contact us and ask for us to meet with them. They also can come forward from Indigenous groups. So
I sort of cut you off, as I mentioned before, about brevity, but my question isn't how they come forward. My question is when they are referred, who makes the final decision about how to refer that project, or how does it get on that list? Is that a decision that you hold by yourself, or is that a decision that Cabinet makes, or is it a decision the Prime Minister makes?
So projects get screened by the Major Projects Office. Yes. Once the Major Projects Office thinks they may be of help, those projects are presented to the Build Canada Committee. The Build Canada Committee reviews those projects and then presents ones that get through to Minister LeBlanc as the minister responsible for the Privy Council. Minister LeBlanc presents them to Cabinet and then ultimately to the Prime Minister.
Okay. And so the Prime Minister is involved, obviously, throughout this process. But the final decision is a Cabinet. It sounds like it's a Cabinet decision. Is that correct?
It is a Cabinet decision, yes.
Okay. And I assume the Prime Minister's office would be consulted throughout the process before it appears in Cabinet. Are you aware of any, do you ever have one-on-one conversations with the Prime Minister about these projects, or are there always officials present?
There's always officials present.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask a question about the tanker ban? It came up in question period today. It seems that you're trying to put some distance between yourself and previous policy decisions of a previous government. Can you state clearly that the current government would either exempt or repeal the tanker ban if oil can make it to the West Coast?
What I can say is that we will work with proponents who have proposals. We have been clear with the proponents. If they have the support of First Nations and they have support of the jurisdictions, we will work with them to clear whatever barriers there are.
So that would include clearing the barrier of the tanker ban?
I can't answer because I don't have a particular project you're talking about, so I have no idea whether...
So do you think that there's no particular proponent because it's unclear whether the government would repeal the tanker ban in order to move that product overseas?
So I don't deal in hypotheticals. If you're referring to the Alberta government has said they will work on a proposal. They will bring it in the spring of next year. And when they bring that, they have to do the work just like any other proponent. And if and when that they have done the work and they've got the support of First Nations and they have the support of the jurisdiction, we will work with them to see how we can make things happen.
Including getting rid of the tanker ban?
I'm not going to talk about hypotheticals.
Okay. But do you think that there's a reason that there is no proponent loudly coming forward now is because the government is being unclear about, because, you have cabinet colleagues who clearly are wedded to the decisions of a previous government. So I guess, so you're not willing to clearly state that you'll remove that barrier?
So what I'm willing to say is that we have been talking with that proponent, the government, the potential proponent, that government of Alberta. We have been working on, as has been widely reported, memorandum of understanding. That is a work in process right now. I think
to Mrs. Anstey for 6 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I've sat in, and we've had a few of these meetings now, and a lot of the conversation has been very similar. And I want to return to something that my colleague touched on in our last meeting, and that's with respect to the constituency concerns that we have around the EV mandates, and especially as that translates out in rural areas. And one of the responses that we've commonly gotten is this notion that it's really just a result of myths or misinformation that's been spreading with respect to the EV mandates. And so my translation of that is that the government just hasn't convinced the Canadian public yet. And so I want to respond today with some of the realities of the rural communities that I represent. And I just want to start and say that just because these concerns or this information comes from around kitchen tables or the floors of dealerships in rural communities doesn't mean that it's misinformed or rural people's voices are just not well educated enough. So if you would just allow me to sort of give you some information about my riding, and then I'm going to allow you to respond. The riding that I represent is 47,000 square kilometers and extremely sparsely populated. So as an example, we have communities that have 150 people, 40 or 50 people. And the low density alone of my riding makes the rollout of charging infrastructure fundamentally different from an urban center. So we can't assume that the solutions for Toronto and Vancouver are going to translate well out into some of these more rural areas. Now, I just want to give you some context here. If you live in St. Anthony in Newfoundland and Labrador, you have to travel 470 kilometers to deliver your baby. Now, if something happens while you're in the hospital and, heaven forbid, that child has to go to a NICU, that's over 1,000 kilometers from this community. So these are some of the challenges that these people are facing. In addition to that, there's 3 communities in my riding, Grey River, Francois, Ramia. You can only get there by ferry. No charging infrastructure in any of these places. These are some of the really rural components that we're talking about. And I know we're often framing these conversations to say, you don't need to buy an EV today. But practically speaking, whether that's 7 or 5 or 4 years down the road, whether it's a 20% or an 80%, it might as well be 100% given what these people are looking at right now. So my question is, especially as it relates to this myth-busting narrative, because another piece of this is we're asking these people to pay $15,000 to $20,000 more in upfront costs for a lot of these vehicles, which absolutely don't make any sense for the communities and the areas that they live in. I think that when we're having these conversations, I get extremely frustrated because I feel it's deeply dismissive of the lived experience of rural Canadians in some of these really rural and remote areas. And it's not just about educating them. It's about really understanding the dynamics. When you also look at these family-owned and operated repair shops, they don't have the upfront money to invest in new electrification within these areas or specialized technicians. So, these seem like some pretty far-fetched concepts for people living in these rural communities. So I just kind of wanted to put it out there to either of you, actually, to sort of walk me through, based on the picture that I've just painted for you, what you feel is, how do I respond to my constituents who look at me and say, this makes absolutely no sense to me? Can you help me to overcome that barrier? Because, I guess, are we just going to give them some more information and debunk these challenges for them?
So I grew up in a rural community. My family is Mennonite. We are farmers. And I know that we drove very long distances to get to local towns and committees. The savings, the facts do matter. The savings when you drive long distances are even greater. Look at Lucid right now. They have a car 800 kilometers. The battery technology is improving every single day.
But if they live in a community that they can only get there by ferry, so are we telling them you're going to take that car, you're going to put it on the ferry, you're going to take it over, you're going to bring it to, 400 or 500 kilometers, where you're going to charge it up there, you're going to drive it back?
There's also hybrid vehicles which are available, and that's also in the EVAS standard. So if it depends on your particular situation,
so we're
you may choose a hybrid vehicle to save
telling them
money.
What to drive in that case?
It depends on if you want to do the math, right? So if you want to, I spend a ton of money on gas. We have a truck. It's expensive. If I want to save money, I'm buying an electric truck. Yep.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Miedema, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you to all the witnesses for your wonderful testimony and for being here this morning. I wonder, because there wasn't too much time to answer that original question from my colleague opposite, if you'd like to take another, let's say, minute to provide some response. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, in a lot of our feedback that we do in terms of polling from citizens, 80% of charging is expected to happen at home. You look in cases of British Columbia with Hydro BC, they have disconnected grid charging as well. So a lot of this charging can be happening in a lot of very innovative ways that can also provide.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming out today for this meeting. But to Ms. Graham, are you familiar with the St. Anne's Bank Marine Protected Area off Cape Breton? Yes. Are you familiar that a promise with the promise that was made to halibut fishermen that they be able or they be allowed to continue fishing halibut in all of that area? You familiar with that promise?
I'm not, sir.
Okay, so you're not familiar with the promise that was made to the fishing industry stakeholders?
Not that one specifically, no, sir.
Okay, so for Mr. DeMarco, you're wondering what's slowing down these processes. Do you think that a fishing industry was told that it would have 100% access for long lining halibut in a marine protected area, only to find out that that's cut down to 50% when the reality comes. What do you think that does for trust in the process from fishing industry and other marine stakeholders?
Thank you for the question. So I'm not familiar with the facts of that specific site, but I would like to comment on the general notion of proper consultation, because to sustain, not only to establish protected areas to meet these targets that we're talking about today, but to sustain them in terms of community buy-in, industry buy-in, it is important to properly consult, as we noted in our report. And to the extent that the three departments make that effort to achieve that buy-in, the more likely there will be not only support for the establishment, but also sustaining those protected and conserved areas. So I'm fully in support of proper consultation, not only for the short-term gain of establishing the protected areas, but also sustaining them with community support.
Thank you. Thank you. So in terms of fishing activity in marine protected areas, bottom trawling is constantly cited as fishing equipment to be banned, bottom trawling gear. However, hook and line is banned in the Funk Island Deep Marine Protected Area and in the Hawk Channel. So, Ms. Graham, have you ever had a baited cod or halibut hook in your hand?
Not, Mr. Chair.
So, what are you protecting the bottom from? You know, this is a this is a static closure. You know, oceans have currents, fish has tails. So, basically a baited hook, you'd have to try real hard to stick that hook in your finger. You'd have to chew on it like a fish. So, why would you ban the most environmentally sensible fishing technology in the world from an area such as the Funk Island Deep or the Hawk Channel or St. Anne's Bank?
So, Mr. Chair, when we decide and undertake to establish a marine protected area, tremendous effort is put into the design of that area, including understanding what are the conservation objectives that we are seeking to actually achieve. And based on those conservation objectives, all of the human activities that are occurring within that area are put through a risk assessment to understand if the activities that are currently taking place in that area will pose a conservation risk. So in the examples that are being raised, if those fishing gears have been deemed to pose a risk to that conservation objective, then the conservation measures are tailored to actually only limit the activities that pose the risk to the conservation objectives.
So, Ms. Graham, under this Liberal government's 30 by 30 policy and this tremendous push to keep up with a numbers game, because 30 is a number, 2030 is a number as well, so it's a numbers game. What do you think, if you had to evaluate the trust in from the fishing industry, from the oil and gas industry, from those that transit through certain areas of the ocean, what do you think the trust is in your process on a scale of 0 to 10 right now?
I would say, Mr. Chair, that we've worked extensively with all of the...
No, what? You must have a feel for it, Ms. Graham. You're dealing with the fishing industry stakeholders. What's the trust level? Could you rate it from 0 to 10?
I would say based on interactions that we've had with all of the actors, that there is a strong level of confidence and trust in terms of
actors?
The work that we're doing.
I don't think that fishermen are actors. They go to sea in Canada's most dangerous, deadly industry, and their livelihoods are being stripped out from underneath their feet. And to come to this committee today and have fishermen and the fishing industry stakeholders be termed as actors, I don't know. You know what? I think an actor might be something like the Atlantic Salmon Federation. But are you familiar with
So, Mr. Small, we are over time.
The official language that you wish to participate in today's meeting.
Selection of cookies and coffee at the back, chipped in by the taxpayer. So, anyways, congratulations. Thank you very much. We will now turn things over to Mr. Kelly for 6 minutes. Mr. Kelly, welcome back to OGO. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's good to be back here.
The first question is for Mr. Burton. In October 2024, Brookfield Asset Management brokered a $256 million loan with the Chinese State Bank while the current Prime Minister was the chair of that company. And in light of what we know about China cultivating business ties with senior policymakers and business leaders, would you classify this as a classic example of elite capture?
I am concerned about this. It's similar to when we appointed Dominic Barton as the ambassador to China. That what if the prime ministership is a transitional job for Mr. Carney and that he'll return to business afterwards? The Chinese will naturally take into account what sort of policies he engaged in with regard to China while he was in that position. So I'm not suggesting that Mr. Carney is, consciously preparing for this, but the effect is the same. And so one is concerned about matters like this, his previous connections with the Chinese regime, and I mean his current policies, which emphasize promoting Canadian prosperity through seeking to expand Canadian exports into the Chinese market, is meaning that we aren't implementing the registry, we aren't dealing with Chinese espionage in Canada. We're not taking effective measures against agents of the Chinese regime who are involved in intimidation and harassment activities in our country, and so on. So the Chinese note that, and I think if you look at the impact of our not implementing the registry, from the Chinese government's point of view, I think they welcome it as similar to the Uyghur resolution, where the Prime Minister and the entire cabinet didn't vote in favor of it, that we don't really mean it, that we're not actually going to do it, that they'll continue to engage in their influence activities in Canada unhindered. The other country we have to look at is the United States, who have increasing doubts about the integrity of Canada as a country which is not infiltrated by China or other states. So, it runs into problems with whether we're going to continue in our role with the Five Eyes and the extent to which the United States feels they can share information with us, and it won't end up being leaked to the PRC. So there are a lot of implications in what you're saying here. It's a very complicated question.
I understand. It's a very complicated position that Canada finds itself in right now. You intimated in your testimony, Mr. Burton, that the eagerness by which the Minister in Public Safety Canada and the government has gone about passing Bill C-70, and then subsequently that eagerness seems to be dissipating as time has gone by. We have no appointed commissioner. You have intimated that there seems to be some softening in the implementation and the approach that the government is going to take if they ever do eventually get around to implementing or appointing a commissioner. Do you think that is because of pressure from Beijing? I mean, the Taiwanese have warned us very much that this is exactly the way the PRC does its business. Do you think that this registry is being compromised as part of a larger influence campaign from China?
Whether it's active or passive is another question, but the recent statements by the leader of the Taiwan delegation here in Canada, and Michael Kovrick's recent statements, and others, I agree with them that we do have a problem here of evidently responding to Chinese agendas in Canada, and this is an ongoing process. In other words, the infiltration gets deeper and deeper as time goes on, and China is becoming more and more aggressive, and we're seeing concerns about Chinese infiltration into Canadian infrastructure. Lead story in the National Post today about the possibility of Chinese sabotage of our water supply by working with the filtration stations. But it's not just the water; it's the EVs. There are just all sorts of areas that suggest that a future conflict with China will not be about buildings blowing up in faraway countries, but it'll be about the APMs won't work anymore. The electricity will turn off, and that real Canadian citizens will suffer.
In Canadian federal politics, the Canucks are represented by two separate yet unequal groups: the globalists who sold out and the opposition trying to salvage a country. These are their stories.
You should do exercises. That's important to our good health. And friends, tomorrow we are going to be visiting with a fisherman who will tell us about his very enjoyable hobby. Now, I would like to see you all through our magic mirror. Romper bumper, stomper boo, tell me, do. Magic mirror, please tell me today, did all of my friends have fun at play? I see all of my friends in Alberta. It's nice to see you. And I see Dan and Vivian. I see Marlon and Mona. I see Catherine and Harley. I see Anne and Elizabeth and Jane. I see Bert and Nicole, and I see you too. I hope to see you tomorrow, right here in Romper Room.
Ding dong, knock knock, hey daddy do. Bing bong, tick tock, bebop boom.
Kick off your weekend with exciting CFL action when the Edmonton Eskimos tackle the BC Lions in Vancouver. Tomorrow night at 10:30 on CFTO TV.